Hey guys, King of Charmanders here. Alright, so I have an update on the most common lines on from YTX Pikachu, but the reason why I'm kind of like iffy is just because I'm looking at this, like, I looked at it like a few minutes ago and I was like, wow, everything's like the same, but at the same time, it's like, I am not surprised. As you see here, there's a lot of lines I've already covered on my previous videos, so I'm not going to go too in-depth on the ones I've already covered. I'm probably going to go through those lines really quickly compared to a lot of other lines, to some of the other lines where I haven't really seen a lot of them or I haven't analyzed them yet. So for this video, I'm going to analyze the top 10 lines as you see here. I'm still going to analyze the most common ones, the ones I've analyzed before, but I'm going to go through them like way faster than I normally do. Anyways, let's get started. Alright, so team number 1 features Gengar, Crustle, Lapras. I haven't covered this one before. Gengar lead's really interesting. Gengar lead can have Shadow Ball, it can have Focus Blast, it's very versatile in the lead, and can force your shields early on. Then you can use Crustle and Lapras to clean up. I'm assuming Crustle is in the middle because it's a decent safe switch, and if you put Smackdown Crustle against a Talonflame, it absolutely deletes it. So as you see here, this team doesn't have a lot of coverage, not somewhat bulky, just because this team's pretty much designed to just smack down and just annihilate everything in your path. That's why, well, Lapras kind of makes up for it, not really, but Gengar and Crustle aren't the thickest things in the world. It is pretty safe and consistent though, so it's going to do a consistent amount of damage, especially against, like I said, Talonflame in the back. Really hates this team. As you see, there are a couple of weaknesses, especially for Ultra Premier. Swampert does, even though Swampert does technically beat Gengar, you can force Swampert shields, you can use Shadow Ball, you can use other versatile moves, etc. Snorlax does give you a hard time. However, if you have Focus Blast, you can Focus Blast Snorlax through shields. However, the reason why Snorlax gives you a hard time is because Snorlax has Superpower. With Superpower, it can take out Lapras, and with the lick damage, it kind of adds up against Crustle. Just because Snorlax is pretty thick, so Snorlax has a really good matchup against all three of these mons. Same thing with Magnezone. Magnezone's pressure with Wild Charge absolutely destroys this team. It does resist Smackdown from Crustle, and it does resist the Ice Charge from Lapras. So Magnezone's got a lot, is going to have a field day with you. It's going to have a lot of fun. Politoed also is a nightmare because it's so fast with Weather Ball. Along with that, Crustle is weak to Politoed, as well as Politoed's Earthquake Beam will do big damage against Lapras. So this team doesn't have a lot of coverage. It has a lot of holds, but it's pretty simple. I understand why this team's being used. Gengar, use Gengar, break shields, safe switch on Lapras, Crustle destroys Talonflame. That's basically the synopsis. As you see here, you have a slew of weaknesses with a super high threat score. In my opinion, there are better teams out there, but this team is basically pressure. Pressure everything, and if you lose the lead, safe switch into Lapras and play accordingly, or hope they have a Talonflame in the back. Alright, next up we have Excavalier, Ampharos, and Swampert for the common team for number 9. This is a pretty much like team number 10. This is a pretty simple team. Like, I think the purpose with this is Ampharos safe switch, Swampert closes out, and Excavalier is your lead. So Excavalier does put a lot of pressure on your opponent, especially if you win the lead, because with Drone and Megahorn, it has a lot of coverage. You can also use things like Aerial Ace, and if you are a demented evil human being, you will Acid Spray your opponent and possibly bait shields. If you do it, it's like one of the most funnest things in the world. Usually, I actually won't shield Excavaliers out in the lead with me because I might think they have Acid Spray. But if you're running in an Ultra lead, it has Megahorn. In Ultra Premier, it's a little more dangerous. As you see here, not a ton of bulk. That's because Ampharos and Excavalier aren't super bulky. They're actually they're not super squishy, but they're pretty squish. As you see here, not a lot of coverage as well as not very safe. If you lose the lead, you safe switch at Ampharos. Ampharos, Thunder types, our Electric types are very good safe switch methods. Unfortunately, Ampharos isn't anything like a Galvantula XL, etc. So this is kind of like, I'd say, like a budget team in a sense, as far as like not having XLs. Because this whole team doesn't have any XLs in it. Does have consistent damage output, however. One of the problems you will have is Swampert. Swampert is a beast, and Swampert does outpace Excavalier with Hydro Cannon and Mud Shot. It also is able to deal heavy damage to Ampharos, and it resists Ampharos Volt Switches, Thunder Punches, and even if you do land a Focus Blast, surprisingly, it does not one-shot Swampert. As you see here, Gallade also will give you a little bit of an issue. Yes, you do resist confusion, however, close combat chunks, and if you get hit with one, it's not comfortable at all. Leaf Blade is also able to take out Swampert, so Gallade is pretty dang good against this team. I don't foresee seeing a lot of Hariyama, so we're not going to go over that. However, this team doesn't actually have a lot of holes in it. Even though Gallade it does great against Excavalier in the 1 shield, in the 2 shield, Excavalier has to hit you with close combat, because Excavalier does resist confusion. Because Steel resists confusion, Gallade is basically, and it's Excavalier, but the reason being is because Excavalier's counter is also resisted against Gallade, so either way, if it depends on who hits what, so Gallade is a very stressful matchup for you. Primeape in Ultra League, Breloom and Roserade. You probably might see Roserade and but you likely won't see it. The two most you will see here is probably Gallade and Swampert. Those are the two ones that will give you a bit of a hard time. Also, Machop can also give you a hard time as well because Cross Chop is so fast. Same thing with Surfetched. Those two Mons, Excavalier is a pseudo fighter, however, it doesn't get stabbed with counter, so it doesn't get the same type attack bonus. Also, it can get outpaced by other fighters like Surfetched and Machamp. However, overall, pretty good team. If you don't have XLs, then the previous team or this team can serve you well. Team number 8 is Dragonite, Empoleon, and Gengar. Okay, so this team's one of those common teams I told you about that I already analyzed. Usually it's a Shadow Dragonite in the lead. The reason why this team is good is because Empoleon is your safe switch, and if you are able to win switch with Empoleon, because it also resists Dragon Breath, Gengar can also go to town. So, well, I think Gengar is actually your safe switch this team. Break Shields with Gengar and then Dragonite and Empoleon clean up. Very simple team. Very popular as well because some top players have used it to climb to high elos. And it's very good. Again, like for this team, your weaknesses will be Magnezone, Excalibur, basically anything that resists Dragon Breath, as well as everything that's super thick, like Snorlax is pretty thick, as well as Obscure. Electivire puts pressure on you because of Ice Punch, and Galarian Stunfisk is just overpowered. So, Galarian Stunfisk can Rock Slide Dragonite to death. Earthquake also hits Empoleon for super effective damage, as well as Gengar. Basically anything with Rock Slide and Earthquake, or for Excadrill, it's Drill Run. So this thing, anything that's Steel and Ground types really give you a problem, as well as things like Magnezone for this team. Great! Team number 7 features Umbreon XL, Clefable XL, and Alolan Ninetales XL. If you see an Alolan Ninetales in Ultra Premier, it's likely because it is a XL. Same thing with Umbreon, and Clefables likely nowadays are XL Pokemon as well. As you see here, this team is obscenely good because it's all XL Pokemon. The bulk of Umbreon combined with the bulk of A9, and, well, Clefable is technically a very bulky, it's not super bulky, but it's a bulky Charmer compared to Togekiss, especially when you give it XL potential. As you see, good safety, good coverage, and extremely consistent because of its damage output. This is a very good team. As you see here, not a lot of holes. A fighter lead might give you a problem. However, I'm guessing that's why Clefable and Ninetales are there. This might be a Charm Ninetales at 2, so this might be a Charm Tails. So Charm A9, it might be a double Charm team, but Powder Snow also works. Basically, the only thing that really gives you a hard time in this team are Steel types, which is why things like Excavalier and Magnezone give you a hard time. Not going to go too much with this. With Umbreon, you just Foul Play Last Resort your way to Oblivion, and then you have 2 Charmers or a Charmer and A9 with Powder Snow in the back. Like I mentioned before, your biggest problem is going to be Steel types, as you see with Excavalier, Magnezone, and Empoleon, also Fire type. So Talonflame does give this team a problem, but what you can do is in the 2 shield, you can pressure with Empoleon, and then you can run over Talonflame with shields with Clefable or Ninetales, or try to do your best, because a 2-shielded Umbreon still does pretty well. However, Fire still is your worst nightmare in the back, so be careful of that. Those are probably going to be your worst nightmares. Other than that, this team has a very good, like, it's not a super low threat score, but because all of these are XL Pokemon and they have so much bulk, there's a lot of things you can do with this team. Alright, so team number 6 features Toxicroak. I'm assuming that's an XL, Empoleon, and Lapras. So a double water strategy in a sense with a Toxicroak lead. Toxicroak's really strong as an XL because it's able to bully its way through a lot of things. Counter plus Mud Bomb allows you to cover the electric types, and Sludge Bomb takes out the grass types. This team, well, Toxicroak is just a beast, okay? The only thing you have to be careful of is if you see a Confusion user and Toxicroak gets lined up against it, you die. It's that simple. So be very careful. Unless Toxicroak can Sludge Bomb, set Confusion user to KO it. As you see here, this team is extremely consistent, does a ton of damage, and is pretty safe. Lapras is your safe switch, I'm assuming, because Lapras is a great safe switch. However, the reason why its bulking coverage isn't that great isn't because of Lapras, it's because of the other two. Unfortunately, Empoleon isn't the thickest thing in the world, so is Toxicroak. It's basically a giant beat stick. Beat stick is in gaming is like something that beats the crap out of something. So that's what Toxicroak does. Toxicroak's whole mission is to beat the unholy heck out of whatever's in front of you. As you see, this team is pretty much weak to the biggest F to this team is definitely Gallade, as well as Venusaur leads. Venusaur I see Venusaur leads a lot, and unfortunately, because it has that poison typing, it does resist your counter. Venusaur can also bully its way through Toxicroak, because Toxicroak's biggest weakness is, even though it does a lot of damage, it's not very bulky. It can go down to 2 Frenzy Plants, so be very careful when it comes to Venusaur. Politoed also gives you a problem just because it's heavy pressure. Toxicroak is weak to Mud Shot, as well as Empoleon. If that is an Earthquake Politoed, it's probably going to do a lot. It's going to do a lot of damage to you over time, especially since it's not something like Empoleon where it has a Steel typing. Toxicroak doesn't do very well against it. It also gets outpaced. Same thing with Jellicent. Jellicent, it's a very expensive mon. However, it is out there. Jellicent XL will give this team an issue because it does effectively resist all of your fast moves. It resists Toxicroak counters, it resists Empoleon's Waterfalls, and Lapras's Ice Shard. So Jellicent is going to be a big wall to all of your plans in Ultra Premier. As you see here, the biggest weakness for you is there's a lot of weaknesses for your team here, and they're pretty popular picks. Swampert and Gallade and Venusaur are very accessible. Politoed, Jellicent XL do give you a problem. Even things like Raichu, well, Achu can give you a problem as well, but this team is very, very, as you see, high risk. I can see the reason why it's so common is because, like I said, Toxicroak is very good. Pretty simplistic to use. Say switch into Lapras if you lose lead. Toxicroak beats down everything in its path, and Empoleon is there for those Talonflames. Well, I think this team really does center around the fact that your opponent hopefully has a Fire type or a Talonflame in the back. Empoleon is also really good because it resists Dragon Breath users, but a pretty solid team. High threat score, but it does a lot of damage. Team number 5 features Machamp, Lapras, and Snorlax. This is a really good team. I've already analyzed this before, but basically you have 2 tanks in the back. You have the option of what you want to switch into, and Machamp as a lead for high pressure. As you see, I've already covered this team before. Very safe, very consistent, has a decent amount of bulk. The reason it doesn't have a lot of bulk is simply because of Machamp. However, I really think Lapras and Snorlax are a pretty tanky combination, so you don't have to worry about that too much. As far as coverage goes, not a ton of coverage, but that's perfectly fine. That's because of the amount of damage and how accessible this team is. As you see here, Swampert does give you a hard time just because it does outpace you. However, Swampert must have Earthquake, so Lapras can still clean up with it, and Snorlax still is able to take a few Hydro Cannons. Machamp can give you a problem as well, especially if your Machamp goes up against its Machamp. Your back row is very weak to Machamp, so you have to take out with your own Machamp, or you have to be able to KO Machamp. Surfetched or other fires will also give you an issue. Venusaur gives you an issue because of Frenzy Plant. Fighters do not do well against Poison types because counter is resisted. Venusaur is also able to tunnel through your Lapras and Snorlax. Again, all of the real big weaknesses in the front are fires. I've already covered this team before, but again, for this team, it's a really great team. Very low barrier to entry because Machamp, Lapras, and Snorlax are pretty accessible. Not the most, I would say not the most, like, dust friendly in the world. However, all 3 of these mons have definitely been out for a minute. Again, your biggest weakness are going to be Venusaur. Fighters, Swampert can also give you a hard time. But it's a pretty good team with a high threat score. Basically, if you see a fighter, you switch into Lapras or Snorlax. Just pray they don't have a fighter in the back, and then you can win. Alright, now the 4th most common team is Galvantula XL and Skarmory XLs. These XLs are really strong. Yeah, this is a really strong team. I'm guessing Galvantula... Well, Galvantula runs through either debuffs or deals heavy damage, tries to take a shield in the lead, and then Skarmory is your safe switch. That's what I'm assuming. And Swampert closes out this match. As you see here, this team has an incredibly high level of coverage. It's not super bulky, however, however, the damage output's so good, and its amount of coverage is so good that it's a very good, very powerful, like, its coverage is amazing. Like, yeah. So, Good consistency, I mean, good safety. Like I said, 2 XLs, how can you get any better? As you see here, this team, when I first looked at this team, I was like, wow, this team's actually pretty dang good. Again, you won't see too many Hariyamas just because Hariyama's bulky. However, you can still, like, discharge, or Skarmory can still have a good matchup against a Hariyama. But you probably won't see a Hariyama. But as you see, this team doesn't have a lot of threats. It's very, very good. Galvantula XL, as I mentioned before, its main purpose is to take shields or debuff with lunge, and then you could possibly switch out with Skarmory, or you could sacrifice Galvantula altogether. There's a lot of plays you can make with a Galvantula lead. As you see here, you're only across the board in the one shield is Hariyama. However, Galvantula is still a beast, and that's why this team has such a great threat score. I think this team has the lowest threat score I've seen out of all the 10 teams, most common teams you see now. Galvantula XL is a beast, and it's very, very powerful. Again, your plays with Galvantula is to deal chip damage, to debuff with lunge, win the league, and then just absolutely annihilate your opponent. It's a really good team. Alright, so team number 3 features Dragonite pulling Excavalier. This is basically almost the same thing as the Gengar variant. It just has an Excavalier in the back. So, not gonna be too much better. Not a lot of, like, okay coverage, safety. Not a lot of bulk because Excavalier is... Gengar, in my opinion, puts a lot more pressure on her opponent than Excavalier. However, Excavalier does do better against things like Umbreon, etc. So that's why Excavalier is good. So, if you look over here, it's pretty consistent as damage. However, Machamp can give you a hard time just because it does punch through and pulling. It also outpaces Excavalier. So that's kind of the issue with Machamp. Also, Mega Horn is resisted by Machamp, so you have to draw run Machamp to oblivion. However, Machamp will get to Cross Chop before you do. Dragonite can also get Rock Slide by Machamp, so just be careful of that. Other than that, this team is very... It's very... like, Excavalier in the back, I think it's used to cover Umbreon, etc. And just give you... just basically beat down the Dark Slash Steel type. So that's why Excavalier's in the back instead of Gengar. So it's just basically better cover. It has better it gives you better coverage. As you see, your potential threats here are Machamp as well as Magnezone and other Excavaliers, ironically. Just because Excavalier resists Dragonite, however, Excavalier will get erased by Hurricane. So Excavalier against Excavalier isn't a bad matchup either. Magnezone, you can also bully through Magnezone. There's a lot of things you can do in the combination with Dragonite. Dragonite is so powerful that Dragon Breath will do a ton of damage. Dragon Claw does get there relatively quickly, unless it's something like Magnezone where you have to line it up and wait till Magnezone fires Wild Charge. But Dragonite's still very strong. I'm assuming you can sacrifice Dragonite, or you win the lead with Dragonite, down shields, and Excavalier and pulling can make up for either the shield disadvantage, or you can farm down whatever is in the back that you... or you can farm down whatever is left after Dragonite goes down, and then you go from there. So, very general team. It's not played too much different from Gengar. It's just Excavalier is in the back, and it handles some XL variations much better than Gengar does. Alright, so the second most common team of Ultra Premier as of right now is Toxicroak, Lapras, and Snorlax. As you see here, it's basically I already went over an Empoleon variation. Snorlax is just there for better safe switch coverage, and assuming with Snorlax you can basically use like Earthquake or Superpower, so you have a better move pool as well. As you see here, this team is pretty... with Lapras and Snorlax, again, it's a great core. It's a bulky core, and you just have a Toxicroak in the front. This team will do a ton of damage, given that you do not see a fighter, because fighters can still give you a problem in the back, believe it or not. Venusaur can also give you a hard time, as you see here, just because Frenzy Plant is so powerful, and 2 Frenzy Plants, as I mentioned before, can need a Toxicroak to the next dimension. Gallade also gives you a problem, because Gallade actually can cover this entire team. Gallade's Confusions will delete Toxicroak, Leaf Blades do run through Lapras, or if you really want to, and you could be really mean, you could take all that pent-up anger and energy and close combat your way through the back row like no tomorrow. Just be careful of Gallade. Also, Politoed can give you an issue as well, just because it has Earthquake, it's going to do a lot of damage. As you see here, overall, it has a high threat score, not a super high threat score, but still, like what I mentioned before, there are mons that can potentially sweep this entire line, depending on how much energy they have. Also, just how, just where they're positioned and how many shields they have. A lot of weaknesses, but I can see why it's so common, why this second team is so common, just because you're able to, it's a very general team, but it's also easy to use, pretty safe, and again, you could say switch with Lapras or Snorlax, and then Toxicroak can clean up in the back, or as long as you don't see Gallade in the back with Toxicroak, you can still pull out some W's, so it's still a really good team. And the most common team is the Empoleon Double Dragon team. Basically, how many times do I, okay, so all you have to do is basically, your safe switch is Kingdra, and then you go Octazooka everything to death. If you get the debuff, you can flip the matchup, or you can outreach through shields, and then take back switch, and then Empoleon and Dragonite go to town. Which is why a lot of people have those charm teams now, because this team, even though this team is still very good for the fact that Kingdra and Dragonite do a ton of damage with Dragon Breath. I'm not going to go too deep into it because this team, I've already analyzed it like 15 times. I personally don't like it because it relies way too much on luck. If Kingdra doesn't get the debuff in a lot of situations, you can get deleted by double charm teams, or just, but yeah, even one charmer can delete this entire team in the back, like Togekiss. Again, you say switch into Kingdra. If you don't get the debuff, you essentially lose. If you don't debuff or win switch, you essentially lose against this team. Also, things like Machamp in the back can possibly drop a bunch of rocks on Dragonite and just end your life with Empoleon. So it's a very high risk, high reward team. Not really based on the basis of skill, but rather just because Dragon Breath is the most overpowered move as far as damage-wise in all of Go Battle League. And that's it, you guys. I hope these teams do help you out. If you're using one of these teams, I hope they serve you well. I can see why these are the most common teams. Either one, they have XLs in it, or they're common gimmicks that still work very well. Along that, with insane amounts of bulk like Lapras and Snorlax being viable, because things like Cresselia and other legendaries do not exist in Ultra Premier. It's basically a chaos fest. The fact that these Pokemon are still allowed in Open Ultra League means that Ultra Premier is basically hasn't changed much at all. It's a very heavily oppressive. It's either bulk damage, or you have XLs, or you have some ABB gimmick like something with Double Dragon, or you have Double Charm, and that's basically what Go Battle League Ultra League has turned into at this point. As you see, a lot of the common teams out here don't really have too many combinations or anything that's super interesting. You've basically seen those before, and like I said, they're basically just combinations to pull off a gimmick, or it's just full of XLs, which are pretty oppressive when you have 3 of them and they're all bulky, or they just deal a ton of damage, and a lot of other players a lot of players can't access them. I still don't have an XL Galvantula just because my weather doesn't allow it here. I'm also not going to use Defit or whatever just so that I can get XL candy for the Pokemon XL that I want to get an unfair advantage. So that's pretty much it, you guys. Again, a lot of these teams you see have been similar. If you have been playing Ultra, you've likely seen these a lot, and it's not a reason. There's not a really good surprise of why these teams are. Some of these teams, as I've analyzed before, are still really popular. Anyways, if you are using these teams, they do very well. That's why generally they do very well. They put a lot of high pressure, or they have a lot of bulk, or like I said, they're full of XLs, or they have gimmicks. Or they rely on the Kingdra debuff, or blowing a charge move through shields. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Again, as more data like this drops, I will do analysis on them. Hopefully this video does help you out and let you see things very quickly from a PvP or like a team building perspective. Please like, subscribe if you haven't already. Good luck on your Go Battle League sets, and I will see you guys on the next video.